Ezekiel chapter 7 is where we're starting tonight. As a reminder, Ezekiel is one of the major prophets. One of the things that we've seen with Ezekiel is he's got more visions than what we've seen in Isaiah or Jeremiah. We'll see some more visions tonight. He is prophesying from Babylon. So he's in Babylon. He went into exile with the first group of exiles. We think about Daniel and him going with the first group of exiles. Ezekiel's in that group. So Jerusalem has not yet been destroyed, which is what we read in Jeremiah. That was kind of the story of a prophet in Jerusalem as it was coming, the destruction was coming. One of the unique things about Ezekiel is we see a lot of reference to we have historical stories. They're not really, it's not, reference is not a good word for it, because he's not like quoting them, but these other religious stories that we know existed at this time, not just for Babylonians, but maybe for the ancestors of Babylonians, Mesopotamians, Akkadians, right? There's the other stories that we know exist, and then we read these stories of Ezekiel, who we know is in Babylon, and we go, oh, that sounds an awful lot like that story, right? And so I think what's happening with Ezekiel is that he's prophesying to a Jewish community who is in exile and who would have, like Daniel, started to get trained in some of the Babylonian culture, right? Learning some of the stories. Remember, Jeremiah prophesies, I guess it's not quite the same group, but he's saying, buy houses, pray for the welfare of the city in Babylon, because this isn't going to be a fast exile here, right? And so this wasn't a couple years, but decades. And so it's a lifetime. It's a get comfortable, and part of getting comfortable for those who would have been with Ezekiel is these are skilled, educated folks. And so they would have, to be more skilled or more educated, would have learned some of these stories. And so when we hear Ezekiel give some of these visions, there is, I think, a level of, oh, I've heard that. Oh, our God is giving us a vision in something like this, right? And so there's kind of notes of that. But at no point is it syncretism, which we're going to talk about tonight, because Ezekiel is prophesying against syncretism. So this isn't saying like, oh, Yahweh and the Babylonian gods and those stories that you've heard, they're similar. No, these are unique visions to Ezekiel, but they ought to kind of ring bells. They ought to kind of rhyme with some of these things we've heard and go, oh, we recognize that, right? It kind of catches attention. So we'll start in chapter 7, and then chapter 8, I'll point some of these things out as we go. All right, chapter 7, verse 1. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, this is what the sovereign Lord says to the land of Israel. So son of man is this title that Ezekiel has in particular that he calls him often. The end is come upon the four corners of the land. The end is now upon you. I will unleash my anger against you. I will judge you according to your conduct and repay you for all your detestable practices. I will not look on you with pity. I will not spare you. I will surely repay you for your conduct and for the detestable practices among you. Then you will know that I am the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Disaster, unheard of disaster. See, it comes. The end has come. The end has come. It has roused itself against you. See, it comes. Doom has come upon you who dwell in the land. The time has come. The day is near. There is panic, not joy, on the mountains. I am about to pour out my wrath on you and spend my anger against you. I will judge you according to your conduct, repay you for all your detestable practices. I will not look on you with pity. I will not spare you. I will repay you for your conduct and for the detestable practices among you. So this it seems to be not just a prophecy, but also sort of kind of poetic, right? You hear some of the kind of rhyming that's going on here. Maybe not rhyming, but like repetition. It feels poetic. This is kind of a Hebrew form of poetry, I think. Then you will know that it is I, the Lord, who strikes you. Verse 10, See the day, see it comes. Doom has burst forth, the rod has budded, arrogance has blossomed, violence has arisen, a rod to punish the wicked. None of the people will be left, none of that crowd, none of their wealth, nothing of value. The time has come, the day has arrived. Let not the buyer rejoice, nor the seller grieve, for my wrath is on the whole crowd. The seller will not recover the property that was sold, as long as both buyer and seller live, for the vision concerning the whole crowd will not be reversed. Because of their sins, not one of them will preserve their life. So that verse 13, the seller will not recover the property that was sold. Well, when I sell something like a property, of course I'm not going to recover it in our own culture, right? We think, what do you mean? Why would I recover that, right? Well, remember in the Jewish faith and the tradition, we get all of the land distribution in the Torah, right? And we get rules for what you ought to do with the land, which tribes are in which land, and we know that goes down to like families. And the idea of the year of Jubilee, which was every seventh Sabbath year, so every seven years, so 49, 7 times 7 is 49, which is actually, 50th year, right? It's supposed to be every 50 years. They would cancel debts. The idea of this was not to, get a good loan the year before or anything like that, but is to say, looking back on, this is the promised land. This is the land that God has given you, and the land is distributed, and your ancestors owned a little plot of land, right? And if you incurred debts or something and you needed to pay them off, you might sell your land. And the way that you sell your land, which is kind of like your last name in a way, is kind of how I describe it. That's how closely tied it is to you. You're giving up a birthright for your future heirs. Well, the idea of the year of Jubilee is that I'm actually not selling my future heirs' birthright, but just my own. And you were supposed to be able to redeem that back. That's the idea behind the year of Jubilee, is that the seller could get the land back eventually. Now, I've said this before, the year of Jubilee, we don't ever see a practice of it. Like in historical, we don't think it was ever actually practiced. We can understand why. It's a hard thing to do, but perhaps. But that's Jubilee language here, saying even the seller won't recover it. This is the Lord prophesying, saying essentially kind of wiping this out, saying somebody else is going to come take it, right? You're not going to get it back. As far as like the seller who might get to redeem it back, people who aren't your own taking this property from you. The buyer and the seller are both going to be out on hard luck here. That because of this judgment that's coming. We shouldn't take that as more than what it is. It's judgment language, trying to say you're going to be removed from the land, like the land won't be yours anymore. This isn't a forever thing, and we know that because of Jeremiah and things like that. But this is just that kind of judgment, opening that up a little bit. Okay, verse 14. They have blown the trumpet, they have made all things ready, but no one will go into battle. For my wrath is on the whole crowd. Outside is the sword, inside are plague and famine. Those in the country will die by the sword, those in the city will be devoured by famine and plague. So remember, if you lived out in the country, you'd go into one of the cities that was like had the walls up if there was an invading army. So it's saying if you're not in the walls, you're going to die by the sword, the invading army is going to kill you. If you're in the walls, you're going to die by famine and plague because you're going to be starved out. That's the judgment here. 16, the fugitives who escape will flee to the mountains. Like doves of the valleys, they will all moan, each for their own sins. Every hand will go limp, every leg will be wet with urine. So the mountains, kind of, we think about they did flee into the area of Edom, which is kind of mountainous region, trying to hide. The warriors at this time probably would have worn skirts. We might call them skirts, but I guess if they were Scottish, we'd call them kilts, but open skirt kind of things. And so if you were so scared that you peed yourself, that's kind of what the prophecy here is, that even these warriors, every leg's going to be wet with urine, is the idea of, even in this ancient culture, that would have been seen as you've lost control of your bladder because you're so afraid, right? Because of the terror. Okay, verse 18. They will put on sackcloth and be clothed with terror. Every face will be covered with shame. Every head will be shaved. They will throw their silver into the streets, and their gold will be treated as a thing unclean. Their silver and gold will not be able to deliver them in the day of the Lord's wrath. It will not satisfy their hunger or fill their stomachs, for it has caused them to stumble into sin. So I'm imagining in some ways this is the idea of what good is your silver and gold when there's no bread, right? When everybody's starving, and all these, one of the sins of the people has been the rich abusing the poor, right? And the rich here, who might still be around, are going to be throwing their silver and gold in the streets because it's like it's unclean, like, get it away from me, but it'll be worthless. They can't use it because there's nothing of need to buy. You can't. There's no bread to buy. There's no food. Verse 20. They took pride in their beautiful jewelry, used it to make their detestable idols. They made it into vile images. Therefore, I will make it a thing unclean for them. I'll give their wealth as plunder to foreigners, and as loot to the wicked of the earth, who will defile it. I will turn my face away from the people, and robbers will desecrate the place I treasure. They will enter it and will defile it. So we kind of get this movement from the rich and their gold, and it'll kind of be out there, then to like jewelry. And it says the jewelry that they use to kind of put on idols. In Judges, we get a story about this. Now, this is long after the time of Judges, but it's actually Gideon, and one of his later stories, he gets a different name, but it's the same characters. The story of the 300 is a really positive story of Gideon, and then there's another story where he kind of has a different name, but it's not a positive because he makes what they call an ephod, which is kind of like either a hat or like a stole or something. It's a religious garment. But then they use the ephod, and he gets like jewelry and things, and they make it, and then they worship it like an idol. And clearly this is something that they would have done in other cases too. Taking jewelry and their wealth and like, what do we do with our money? We're so rich. Well, let's do this. And they might make an idol or dress up an idol statue with jewelry or things like that. And then, so he moves from kind of gold to what you did with your riches, then to the temple, where it says, robbers will desecrate the place that I treasure. It's the house of the Lord, right? The temple. And defile that place. All right, verse 23. Prepare chains, for the land is full of bloodshed, the city's full of violence. I'll bring the most wicked of nations to take possession of their houses. I'll put an end to the pride of the mighty, and their sanctuaries will be desecrated. When terror comes, they will seek peace in vain. Calamity upon calamity will come, and rumor upon rumor. They will go searching for a vision from the prophet. Priestly instruction in the law will cease. The council of elders will come to an end. The king will mourn, the prince will be clothed with despair, and the hands of the people of the land will tremble. I will deal with them according to their conduct, and by their own standards I will judge them. Then they will know that I am the Lord. So there, this calamity upon calamity, you kind of move through the different forms of, let's call it government, right? He says they'll go searching for a vision from the prophet. That's one form of, let's call it authority. You know, there's some of these are government, some are just authority. Priestly instruction. Priests are different than prophets. Ezekiel's unique in that he is a priest, or raised as a priest, and he's also a prophet. But they're not always the same. In fact, it's kind of rare. The council of elders will come to an end. So that's another group, like that would meet and make decisions for the nation or the city, depending on what we're talking about. The king will mourn. So the king is the head of the people and the head of the military too. And so we kind of get these different movements here. If this was a judgment against America, it would be, it's almost as if he'd moved from your pastors, your legislative branch and representatives, your president, your judges. It's kind of, that's the point of the movement from these different seats of authority. And if it was Brownwood, he might say the city council and the commissioners and the DA's office, and that's kind of the idea that how it ends here. All right, chapter 8. I like chapter 8 a lot. I think there's a lot here that if you just read it on your own, you go, oh, okay, But there's some interesting things going on. Okay, in the 6th year, in the 6th month, on the 5th day, while I was sitting in my house, and the elders of Judah were sitting before me, the hand of the sovereign Lord came on me there. The 6th month, and the Jewish calendar is odd because you've got the calendar for their religious calendar and then another calendar. The 6th month here is the autumn equinox. So we might say late September. So if we were to read it that way, I don't know the exact day, but it's the 6th year of exile in September, right? Now this land is we talked. I don't know when we talked about this, but the how on a map of a globe, longitude is long and latitude is flat. Our latitude in Brownwood is close to the latitude of the ancient Near East, right? They're in the northern hemisphere. So when we say September, they have similar seasons to us, right? They're going to be on the same, whereas southern hemisphere, the seasons are inverted. So we think about, you grew up around farmers, or you know any farmers. September's harvest, coming up on harvest time. The autumn equinox is the idea here. The autumn equinox is about this time that he has this vision. I looked and I saw a figure like that of a man. From what appeared to be his waist down, he was like fire, and from there upon his appearance was as bright as glowing metal. He stretched out what looked like a hand and took me by the hair of my head. This is one of those stories that there's a similar story to it, right? This vision sounds similar to it, a Mesopotamian story of, I don't even know the names of it, but there's let's see, where the crown prince of Assyria wanted to see the underworld, and so the goddess or the god of the underworld said, okay, and came and picked him up by his hair and took him to the underworld. And then there was the god or the goddess of the underworld, and their image was like lightning, right? And so you can kind of see, it sounds similar, this kind of vision, if you were familiar with that story. Verse 3, he stretched out, he took me by the hair of my head, the Spirit lifted me up between earth and heaven, and in visions of God, he took me to Jerusalem. So he's in Babylon, he's with the elders in autumn, and then he's taken to Jerusalem, to the entrance of the north gate of the inner court, where the idol that provokes to jealousy stood. So the north gate of the inner court, this temple language, where he's now in Jerusalem, and he's got this vision of him in the temple, particularly here at the north gate, and the idol that provokes jealousy. This is the same language used in Chronicles when the king of Judah set up an idol of Asherah. We hear about Asherah a lot, who is like a fertility goddess of the Canaanites. And in Chronicles, they use this language, the kind of the idol that provokes jealousy. And so it's referencing, he's looking at this Asherah image. We hear called Asherah poles sometimes, but in the temple, right? This isn't some high place. This is in the temple. Someone set up a pagan Canaanite image. All right, let's keep going. Then he said to me, verse 4, and there before me was the glory of the God of Israel, as in the vision I had seen in the plain. So he's already had this vision in the plain, and then he sees the glory of the Lord, right? Which makes sense that the glory of the Lord is supposed to be there at the temple, but he also sees this this idol that's here. Verse 5, then he said to me, Son of man, look towards the north. So I looked, and in the entrance north of the gate of the altar, I saw the idol of jealousy. So this Asherah idol. And he said to me, Son of man, do you see what they're doing? The utterly detestable thing the Israelites are doing here. Things that will drive me far from my sanctuary. But you will see things that are even more detestable. So it's kind of this introduction, because we're going to get some more here. You see what they're doing? They're worshiping this other god or goddess here in my temple. But you're going to see even worse things, he tells them. Verse 7, then he brought me to the entrance of the court. I looked and I saw a hole in the wall. And he said to me, Son of man, now dig into the wall. So I dug into the wall and saw a doorway there. And he said to me, go in and see the wicked and detestable things they are doing here. So presumably the court, the notes that I have is in the temple, or not the temple, the palace. I don't know if it's a palace or the temple. Either way, we're getting kind of religious language here. But he comes to the side, he's peek in, okay, now dig in, okay, there's a door, now go in, see what they're doing behind closed doors is the idea, right? Verse 10, so I went in and looked, and I saw portrayed all over the walls all kinds of crawling things and unclean animals and all the idols of Israel. In front of them stood 70 elders of Israel, and Jazaniah, son of Shaphan, was standing among them. Each had a censer in his hand, and a fragrant cloud of incense was rising. Okay, couple of things here. The censer in their hand, a fragrant cloud of incense is rising. That is worship imagery, right? They're burning incense. But you ought to be. There are instances in Leviticus and the Torah when you burn incense as a way of worship, right? Here, they are burning incense as a way of worship. And the 70 elders of Israel are there. And then he name drops this guy that I'm sure is important. I don't know who he is, though. But it's important enough. Now, what's all over the walls? These depictions of crawling things and unclean animals. If I said crawling things, what comes to mind? Snakes? Bugs? Exactly. In the Egyptian mythologies, God worships, there's lots of bug imagery, lots of crawling thing imagery. And in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is one of the more well-known kind of historical things they can point to, there's imagery of these kind of crawling things and things like this. And so we don't get it right on the nose, but neither do we get this right on the nose. It's the idol of jealousy. And here we get these images of crawling things, and there is something worshipful that's happening. It seems to be that we get some Egyptian idolatry, where we're starting to get syncretism because we're talking about in the house of the Lord, right? But it's not quite syncretism, but it's kind of there. And I'll tell you why it's not quite, because we're going to get at the conclusion a fully, I think, syncretism of these kind of different worship things. But so we get this one and this one. Okay. These elders are worshiping what seem to be Egyptian styles of worship. Verse 12, he said to me, Son of man, have you seen what the elders of Israel are doing in the darkness, each at the shrine of his own idol? They say, the Lord does not see us. The Lord has forsaken the land. Again, he said, you will see them doing things that are even more detestable. So it's kind of raising the stakes. We're going to hear that again, this claim that they think I don't see. They think that I don't see, and they think that I've abandoned them. So part of the accusation here, because remember, there's already been an exile into Babylon. Part of the accusation here is, well, maybe Yahweh has betrayed us, or not betrayed us, but left us. And maybe he's not our God really at all. And if he is, maybe he can't see us, right? If we get into these walls and he's not paying attention to us. There's accusation of idol worship on top of unfaithfulness to those who ought to know better, right? But then he says, not once but twice, but you're going to see something worse than this. You're going to see something worse than this. And then he keeps going. Then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of the Lord, and I saw women sitting there, mourning the god Tammuz. Now, the god Tammuz is a Mesopotamian god. And there's a similar Greek myth. When I was reading about this, that sounds more familiar to me, just maybe because we're in a Western society. But the goddess of in the Greek myth, the goddess of fertility, fruit and vegetables, Demeter, was married to Hades, and she'd go to the underworld during the winter, and that explained why everything got cold and you can't grow things in the winter, right? That's the myth explained that. Well, the Tammuz is a similar story, right? Where Tammuz goes to the underworld, and that's how they explain the seasons. And so when autumn equinox is coming, we're getting near to the winter, and they'd say that Tammuz died, and then would be resurrected for the spring. When you mourn Tammuz, it's mourning the death of the coming of the winter, right? That's what they're referring to, is this cyclical, worshipful pattern that's Mesopotamian in its origin. And he sees all these women mourning. Not just one, but it's a worshipful act that they're doing. Verse 15, he said to me, "Do you see this, son of man? You will see things that are even more detestable than this." So even more. So we get all from the region, but different cultures, different religions, different pagan worship. And the heat kind of keeps getting cranked up. Verse 16. He then brought me into the inner court of the house of the Lord. So the inner court of the temple. Every kind of area of the temple is supposed to be holier, right? The inner court of the temple, between the portico and the altar, there was about 25 men here in this vision, with their backs toward the temple of their Lord. So the back towards the Holy of Holies, if you will, facing the gate, towards the east, and they were bowing down to the sun in the east. This is why I think this is interesting that it's in autumn, because in the autumn equinox, the sun would have shone right through the area of the temple in the way they were worshiping. It says they're worshiping the sun, but particularly at this time of the vision, the sun would have been most clear in the setting sun here, or the rising sun in the east. Sun rises in the east? Sunrise. So either way, it's clear that they're worshiping, and it's coming straight in to the temple gate here at this time of year. And these 25 inner temple men, presumably priests, are there bowing down and worshiping. Now, every one of these religions and the others in the ancient years that had a pantheon of gods, lots of gods, all of them had a sun god, right? In Egypt, it was Ra, and then I can't tell you the other names of them, right? But I mean, even in the Greek myths, Apollo is the sun god, or brings the chariot of the sun across. And pantheon of gods, of course, you got the sun. We got to worship it, right? There's a sun god. This is where the full syncretism comes into place, is this sun worship. And it seems that they're worshiping Yahweh as the sun god, right? And that's where I think this kind of comes together, is we already see in these holy places they're doing syncretistic worship of a sort, but then to claim that Yahweh is part of this, let's call it a pantheon, right? That's when it becomes I'm not synchronizing religion if I start, I don't know, worshiping Buddha, right, or a Hindu god, right, and claim to be a Christian. But it's I sort of am. But it's when I begin to put like a Buddha up here next to the cross and say, our faith tells us that the cross and the Buddha, at that point, we're creating a new religion. That's where the syncretism comes in. And is worse because you're changing. It's one thing to say, I'm going to leave the faith and I'll go worship in this other faith because I don't believe this anymore. I think that's the truth, right? But it's worse to say, I think it's worse, and I think this is the point of some of the vision, is say it gets worse and worse and worse because they're not just worshiping Asherah. Oh, they're not just worshiping the Book of the Dead and the Egyptians. They're not just worshiping Tammuz and the Mesopotamians. They think they're all part of this, like Yahweh, Yahwistic faith, the faith of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob is really just a pantheon. So that's where the full syncretism kind of comes in this vision. And I think why God keeps saying, oh, it's going to get worse. You think that's bad? Let me show you. And I think this vision, more than anything that can come to mind for me, articulates the sin of the people of Israel. When we hear about idolatry, I can kind of become callous to it and numb to it because it's kind of like, oh, yeah, that's the thing they're doing wrong. Oh, yeah. And then it's like this vision that's kind of like embodying, no, you're just trying to do it all. You're trying to bring it all together and then baptize it all in the faith of your ancestors. You know, that's what syncretism is. And I think that's the epitome of the sin that God is holding up, saying, I've given you this land and this law, and you're choosing to make it something, bastardize it, right? Make it something it's not. Wouldn't it be better? I mean, he doesn't say this, but wouldn't it be better? I've already said it. Just go worship Asherah somewhere else. I don't want you to, but to say that, oh, this is the same thing, and you know, it's the apple doesn't fall far from the tree in our own culture. Okay, let me finish this chapter. Verse 17, he said to me, have you seen this, son of man? Is it a trivial matter for the people of Judah to do the detestable things they are doing here? Must they also fill the land with violence and continually arouse my anger? Look at them putting the branch to their nose. Therefore I will deal with them in anger. I will not look on them with pity or spare them. Although they shout in my ears, I will not listen to them. So this idea of, yeah, they're going to say, you know, help us when the destruction comes, but they've gone too far, right? They've had so many opportunities, and it's gone so far that that's where this is going to end up.
What is that the last part of 17?
The putting the branch to their nose?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
My Bible says that this is an insulting gesture.
Oh, just.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
That would make sense. They're insulting me. They're flipping me the bird, maybe, right?
It says the branch, in mine it says the branch refers to the worship of Tammuz. For the cedar branch was a symbol of immortality associated with the cult.
Okay, so that makes sense. That
to
they
put it to their nose was their attempt to inhale and supposed life-giving powers of a revived Tammuz.
okay. So when we hear about other practices of worshiping at great oaks or things like that, trees, it makes sense that Tammuz is the goddess or god. I'm not sure which one of plants and trees and things like that, and so.
Well, Tammuz, wasn't that like Semiramis' son that was killed by the wild boars around for the Tower of Babel, all that? Nimrod. It's extra biblical, but
right.
That's where the mother and son worship came in.
Oh, okay.
Which was what, Venus and Cupid and all the ones that are all over the world.
Yeah.
They carried it from the Tower of Babel.
It could be. I'm not sure. But what we do know, and that's why, it is pulling from all of these cultures. And as a reminder think about like the scope of ancient history, which we're reading ancient history, but the seat of power in this part of the world has almost always been in the Babylon area, right? It wasn't always Babylon itself, but they've always kind of been. I mean, Abraham is from Ur, which is near Babylon, right? Like which was Mesopotamia before it was Babylon, before it was Assyria, and so they would have had a rich history of these other cultures that had existed prior to them, at least in that area. And so that would make sense that if there's other stories that kind of indicate this, that are connecting all of those. Yeah.
Speaking about them worshiping the sun, and their back was to the Holy of Holies.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
That's just horrible.
That's exactly right. And I think that in particular, that detail that's put in there is absolutely intentional, because the proper worship, and I don't know that Jews ever bowed down and worshiped towards the Holy of Holies. I don't know if they did or not.
Well, Daniel, he always looked toward Jerusalem when
Did he?
prayed, you know.
Okay.
Toward the east. And
Okay.
That's what they were told to do.
Right. And so, but that's because the only place that the presence of God would come and was to the temple. Before it was established at the temple, it was the tabernacle. And before the tabernacle, it was the mountain, Mount Sinai, where God came down and engaged with Moses. Right, God's kind of manifest presence, if we could call it that. I don't want to say physical presence fully, but there is something of the glory cloud that comes. Right, that this was the place, and that their backs towards it and worshiping.
And doesn't
the
it
sun.
say that the Son of God will come through the eastern gate?
And that's why the Muslims have it all. I mean, they've got rocks, and then they put a graveyard in front of it because the Jews won't cross over that,
Man.
Yeah, it's, like Jesus has to worry about that.
Yeah.
He didn't really have much problems with graveyards and
No.
rocks and stones in the past, so I don't think that's.
I want to ask you about that syncretism.
Yeah.
Now, like Rick Warren in his church,
Mm-hmm.
he says that the Christians and the Muslims worship the same God. And so he has a Quran and a Bible in his pews.
Oh,
So is that what that is? Or is that just
Yeah.
merging, not worshiping two different ones?
Yeah. So I don't want to speak to Rick Warren. What I will speak to is if we had a Quran in the pews, that would be syncretism. Yeah.
Okay.
I think absolutely. And here's why that's so hard. Not that, I think that's syncretism. Why it's hard for me, if I were talking and evangelizing to a Muslim or trying to get to know them, I would want to connect on the idea of monotheism, right? To say the God of Abraham is your God too. And so I don't love it when someone says, like, that's not my God, right? Allah is not my God. Well, Allah is the word for God in Arabic. Now, I'm not going to go up and preach about Allah, but as someone who has a desire that all would come to know Jesus Christ and the Son of God, I might allow for conversations to begin there. Now, I would not try to preach or evangelize or tell a Muslim friend, well, you could just worship, or you could read the Quran as long as you believe in Jesus. And to me, that is a step I'm not willing to take, and I think is a syncretistic. When we're talking about words and the words we use for God, I could see why somebody would say that because it is so representative of who the Muslims are, that out of a desire to be faithful, a faithful witness, I could see why some might say that. have an issue talking about it in that way. My friend David, he's preached here before. He's been in Jordan and Egypt, and he's in New York City right now, and ministers to Muslims. And he speaks Arabic, and they talk about Allah, because in Arabic, Allah is God, and he is talking about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the God who Jesus is God, the Son of God, Jesus, and when they speak in Arabic, they use the word Allah. At no point does he say, "Oh, the Quran is God's divine scriptures," right? I didn't know that about Rick Warren, and that's concerning for me. And I don't think that's a helpful way. I understand the desire to connect, because I think that those who are seeking religious gods are seeking what all humans are seeking, which is a connection to the Creator. But I think they're deceived. I don't think all of those things go to the same mountaintop. But I do think that that desire inside of them is a desire for a truth that they've been deceived by. Deceived to say the truth is here, the truth is there. There's only one truth. And the problem is when we begin to say relativism, right? To say, well, that your truth and my truth, and we're kind of all going to the same truth.
It starts with that ecumenicalism where all the religions are coming together.
Yeah. What do they call that? Well, ecumenical would be the denominations coming together. Man, there's a word, and maybe syncretism is the only word, but
No, there's another word, I've heard it.
but it's the coexist kind of bumper sticker, that I'm sure someone means for it to say peace, right? Like we should all be at peace with one another. Would that we all could be. But because it's all religious symbology, it seems to me that they're saying more than just let's have peace with one another, but we all worship the same. And I think that that's syncretism. And I can't think of the word I'm trying to think of. Yes, I would not that we would have a Quran in the pews or a Book of Mormon in the pews or the Bhagavad Gita. Am I saying that right? It's the one of the Hindu sacred books. Anyway, yes. So I don't know if we have time to go through chapter 9. All right, let's just do it. All right, we're going to start on chapter 9, verse 1. Unless there's something else you guys have a question about.
I do, but it's not related to this.
Okay, well, I'm a little nervous that I can get through chapter 9. It's a short one, but I want to there's some interesting things here that I want to be able to spend some time there. So ask your question.
Oh, this is not related. What is TikTok?
Oh, that's a good question. That is not related. It's a social media app.
Bad?
Yes.
Chinese.
It depends on what you mean by bad. The
Chinese.
bad and who owns it. Yeah.
And there's a lot of bad things that come off of it.
Right. So the app itself is it's like videos. People post videos, but they're like short videos. But it's in an idea of like social media-esque, right?
Yeah.
Whereas what began as like Facebook or Twitter, which is kind of posts. They might start putting pictures. Then Instagram came around, and Instagram is all pictures with maybe like a description. And then Vine is similar to TikTok, but is dead now. But is short videos that are kind of funny, right? Internet type of videos that you might laugh at. Now TikTok is owned by the Chinese, and
Government.
the concern is that they are using information, essentially spying or gathering information that's why it's a national security issue. but it's very popular right now.
Well, and they're preying on the youth because at one time down there in Austin, there was a thing on telling the kids to go into the schools and do vandalism to the schools, and so they were doing this because TikTok told them to.
But they did say tonight on the news that children, grade school children, junior high, are writing to their senators and their whoever they write to, and giving them orders that they are to keep TikTok.
So, I think the idea is that
Man,
the bad part of TikTok, like any social media, is going to have some negative actors in it. What makes TikTok different than Twitter, which has a lot of negativity, a lot of things on the internet I wouldn't want my kids to see.
yeah.
But same thing on Instagram, same thing on Facebook, right? You got to be careful with that social media. The difference between those and TikTok is that TikTok is who owns it, who's getting all the data,
That's right.
and that's the concern. Why it's a national security concern, and so yeah, but it's very popular right now.
With children.
I mean, it's probably the most popular social media app right now. When I was in high school, it was Facebook. Facebook was just coming out. When I was in college, it was
Any such thing.
right. Exactly.
We didn't even have television.
We're just in we're in such an interesting time because social media's existed for 20 years, maybe not even 20, 2008. So yeah, I guess 15 years, 16 years. The internet's only been around for 25 years, right? I think about the internet.com bubble in 2000. So small a time when we think about, it's just, we don't know how to regulate things and information, and it's becoming, I think we're coming to a place where we got to say, it's problematic in certain ways that are not just at a parent level. Be careful about what you look at on the internet, but at a national level of what is protected by free speech and what is national interests of other actors. That's not free speech, it's manipulation, trying to manipulate. I don't know. Anyway, that's a good question, but that's what TikTok is. Yeah. So I think it's the data. I don't think that on TikTok, the concern is not that they are doing like subliminal messaging, like I don't think that's the concern as much as it is all this information that they're gathering, like how deep does it go? What are they allowed to see? Does it give them access to phones? Because we know from the Patriot Act and your phones are little microphones that listen to everything you say, and that's not like wearing a foil hat. You start talking about, let's have a conversation about John Deere. You go look at your phone, and there's going to be a John Deere app. I did not look up John Deere. I'm not a farmer, but it'll show up, it's because they're listening and they're using data to put ads out. And then you talk about, what about if a government owned a company that had access to such data?
Well, we already know that China can get up to no good.
And that's the other side of the argument, is to say, you think that TikTok's the only thing that China's got access to? You sure about that? And that's, fair.
Arkansas just kicked China out of Arkansas.
Yeah.
That was a wonderful.
Yeah.
We need to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard it, somebody said something about doing it.
It was it was one of the propositions on but those propositions don't mean anything. In my opinion.
They confuse me so bad.
Well, it's because they're asking a question behind the question. The first one said, do you think we should, I'm getting on the soapbox here. Do you think we should eliminate all property taxes but not increase taxes of individual taxpayers? And it's like, well, yeah, but what you're actually saying is we should cut the budget. Like, that's what you're proposing, because how else are you going to pay for it? The things that we,
You gotta have taxes to run the government.
That's exactly right.
We don't, any of us like to have to pay taxes, but you have to have taxes to run the government.
That's right. So you can't just throw out some, oh, do you think we ought to cut 100% of property tax? Oh, well, so sure, yeah, but like, what do you mean by that? How are you going to get income and revenue for our roads and things like that, you know? It's just foolish. And that's what all those propositions, in my opinion, almost all of them are just like, okay, you're something else, you know, like, I don't know how they get on either. I thought about looking it
Well,
up.
they
I'm sure.
put in, do you not?
Right.
They word it like you
Not what, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So,
You have to read it and reread it a couple of times.
exactly.
I have one more question.
Okay, sure.
About Allah and God.
All right.
Why is it, if they're the same to the Muslim as to us, if God is that, that's what that means, why do they say Allah Akbar, which is God is great, Allah is greater?
Hmm.
Sounds like something you'd read out of Isaiah or
Right,
Ezekiel or
right.
something.
Yeah.
That part doesn't make sense. And when did Allah come into, was what, 600 AD or something like that? Way later than
Yeah, it was.
our God 6,000 years ago.
Yeah. Your question is a good one because it's in some ways I don't know if you say philosophical, but it's what do you mean by God or Allah? What do you mean by that? Because in the same way we might say our God is greater than the, for example, we'll keep it in English, than the God of the Mormons. Whereas the Mormons might say it's the same God, and I might say to a Mormon, you understand something of the God that we worship, but you've been deceived. This is not, all these extra things that you put into it are not, we're not in agreement on that, right? And so maybe that might be a good example to kind of talk about, is I can connect to them, but I might even say a statement of our God is greater. It's not me acknowledging that your God is a different God. And I wonder if for Islam, they're monotheistic. They don't think that Christians, well, okay. Depends on who you talk to, because they sort of got denominations too. But they don't think that the Christian God exists outside of they believe in one God, right? And so they might say God is greater, and I'm not an expert on this, so I may just be talking out. In the same way, they'd say we are right, like we have the truth. And in some way that I would also say conversely to a Muslim, yeah, I think my God is the truth. Like, and so it depends again on what you mean by Allah. And names have, so if it's just the Arabic name for God, or if I'm trying to bring a Muslim to the truth and praying for them to have a vision of Jesus, you know, and to say, you know something of God, but you've been deceived about the full truth of it, right? And so it is sticky. And if I were talking, so I guess I say that as, when I think about it as a Muslim here, right? As opposed to Islam as a whole. I would not say Islam as a whole, we can coexist or we can come together because we both worship the same God. I think for me, I think of it as an evangelist. Like, I think in our Christian identity, we kind of have evangelism into us, making disciples and, hoping for others to convert. And that's where, in my mindset, I'm thinking about an individual, not a religion. So I might clarify and say, of the religions, if we're talking about religions, no, I don't think that we worship the same God in the same way. So maybe that might be somewhere the miscommunication or it depends on what it is we're talking about, right? Anyway, it's kind of, like I said, philosophical. That's not the right word, but kind of a high. The reason we can get confused is because we're talking about words and what do we mean by those words? Because the meaning we put into something matters tremendously, right? We could both say the same thing, but mean something different, and that's where some of that complexity comes in. So, yes.
God, Yahweh is a God of love too,
Yeah. Yeah.
and a lot of theirs is more hatred. I mean,
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. I do know, so I suppose I don't know. I do know that Muslims, a large portion of Muslims see Jesus as a prophet and think that in some ways, it feels kind of like we describe it as Mormonism in some way. I keep coming back to that, but as an addition to following up on, like Jesus was worshiping Allah, and now and then Muhammad came about, and he's kind of the final prophet, right? And so not all Muslims are. We hate the lesser hate Christians, but we hear about them in the news the most because there are some that are like that, right? Certainly, these terrorist
but
organizations.
do they believe in Jesus at all?
Not like we do.
Not the same way we do, but they do believe that he
They
existed.
believe he's gonna be their
And he was a
They
whole-
think he's a prophet, don't they?
servant to the Mahdi, or however you say that
Yeah.
word.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be servitude to him when your Christ shows up, which is that, however you say that word.
Yeah,
Mahdi.
that he was a holy man or a prophet. And it depends on the denomination, if we can call it that, of the Muslim that you're talking to, about how generous they are towards Christians. So, yeah, these are good questions, important questions.
I know it'll send cold chills on you when you're sitting in one of those kibbutz
Mhm.
and they'll come in and start saying that, knowing you're a Christian group in that kibbutz, and they come in hollering that Allah Akbar just to the top of their lungs.
Yeah,
I mean, you just get cold chills on you.
yeah,
They do it on purpose.
yeah.
Ugh.
Hmm.
You can't stand that. You can't stand that. No, you wouldn't dare. Not in that situation.
Yeah. That, I'd imagine that would be a powerful moment. Powerful in a specific way. Yeah. In some ways feels prophetic. That you're in this place, this holy place, and that you're saying God is great. And there are sometimes we see prophetic things. The God can even speak through the mouth of a donkey, right? That what you mean is not what it actually means, right? Is what I might say, not to them, but in my mind, as I'm saying a prayer or something like that. That God is great, and God, this is a holy place. What you're saying is not what you think you're saying, what you're intending to say, but there is something prophetic of in that place. God will not be mocked, I suppose is what I might say.
You're gonna find out.
Yeah,
one of
yeah.
these days.
Right. That's right. Yeah. And that's what, where it comes, I'm just going in circles, but where it becomes complex, because these folks would have said, yeah, we're worshiping Yahweh, the same Yahweh. And it's important, though, to say, no, we're not. This is different because they have taken that and turned it into something else, but you can't just say, oh, yeah, that's it. It's the same one. You can worship that way and I'll worship this way. Well, no, this isn't what we believe. This is our theology matters, right? That's what one of my theology professors would say is there going to be a test when we enter the pearly gates? No, I don't think so. I don't think that they'll give us a quiz on, did you have this theology? Did you have that theology? The blood of Christ is what matters. But that's not to say our theology doesn't matter. You can just believe whatever you want. Well, no, we have to strive to think well and to think rightly. So it's important. It's important. Yeah. Oh man, we went way over. We got talking. It is good. Good talking. Okay, let's pray. Let me close this in prayer. God, we are grateful to get to come together. Lord, we pray that you would help bring wisdom in some of these complex issues that we see. Lord, might we have the clarity that Ezekiel had, that you gave to him, that you give to us. God, we pray that you go with us from this place and protect us and guide us, be with us and bring us back together safely. We pray it all in Jesus' name. Amen.